Welcome everyone to the Museum of Graffiti's daily Artist Talk Live program where we connect with artists who have pioneered or advanced the culture of graffiti writing and culture. I also want to welcome you as I am here to discuss with the one and only Michael Walsh Prism his works today, both of his walls, his trains, but more importantly, his art of sculpture. As well, I took the time out today to pick up a book that we have at the shop at the Museum of Graffiti by a good friend of mine, Edwin Fade Sakasa. If you haven't seen this book yet, I would advise you go check it out. I was checking it out. He's made such a huge impact on hip hop culture with the Shirt Kings. So Shirt King Fade, and he will be joining us in the near future. So as I wait for all of you to join me, I had the time to breeze through this book, and it's just fantastic. It's hard to get, by the way. That said, I'm waiting for Michael Walsh to join us. It looks like he has, and let's dive in with him. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Hey, good. And yourself?
Good, Mr. Prism. Welcome to the Museum of Graffiti's Daily Artist Talk Live. I'm
Cool.
super excited to be having this conversation with you today. Lot to cover. So let me just very quickly, for the sake of informing people with who you are, you used to write Prism. Michael Walsh, you were born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And Michael Walsh is one of the more innovative and forward-thinking artists of the graffiti sculpture movement. I have to emphasize that over the past 2 decades, you've also worked in many materials, from metal to modern and industrial sculpture, digital sculpture forms. And you are a self-described student of art history, architecture, and design, but your roots are really implanted in graffiti culture. And you've exhibited globally, including the International Sculpture Conference, the Carnegie Museum, the National Archaeological Museum in Florence, Italy, Burning Man, which is super cool, and the Art Gallery of Ontario. And that your works, both private and permanent works, have been featured in Architectural Digest, Magazine, the Toronto Star, Graffiti World by Nicholas Gantz. It's a very famous book we carry actually in the museum. And A History of American Graffiti by Roger Gassman and Caleb Nealon. So Michael, I want to welcome you, and I want to jump right in with you because you are very fascinating.
Thanks, man. It's very flattering, everything you're saying, you know?
Well, let's jump right in, because you are a mid-Atlantic writer, and you're part of I guess, second generation of Pittsburgh writers, I imagine, right? Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
And that when we were talking earlier, you had mentioned to me you started writing about 80, 89, 90, and that you were influenced by that first wave of graffiti writers, Day and Smash Money, the versatile artists. Tell me about the early days of graffiti for you in the Mid-Atlantic.
Well, we were on the street all the time, skateboarding and, just kind of being up to mischief pretty much. And probably around that time, fellow skateboarder, musician, artist, Brian Brick, who wrote Force One, kind of got me really into it. I'd always saw it all around the neighborhoods growing up. Buddha, who's featured extensively in spray can art and other things like that. And then artists like you mentioned, Dezez, Smash Money, Max and Boo, the Zebra Team, just things like that. I saw it everywhere, and it really influenced me. and what I would start, constructing as far as letters and an approach to, what I wanted to do more wild style. So, that they were a direct influence.
Very little is known about Pittsburgh in terms of its graffiti scene, but notably, somebody who's not a graffiti writer comes from Pittsburgh who actually had a huge impact on the culture. That was Henry Chalfant.
Yes, absolutely. And Henry's impact kind of ended up, vicariously getting back to us through Buddha, who learned a lot, coming to the Bronx, writing with Tracy 168. He brought all those influences here. Another writer from Philly, Raz, came here kind of closer to me in my neighborhood and influenced a lot of the writers. So we had a really direct line to Philly and New York styles that started to create a hybrid Pittsburgh style in the early to mid 80s. And, from there I branched out, really looked at like Tats Crew, T-Kid, lots of New York stuff, lots of Bronx stuff. I mean, too many to mention. Part, Dondi, West Coast, Dream TDK, all that stuff really got into my soul, and mixed with, the stuff from Pittsburgh and kind of created my style.
So one of the things that was interesting, you obviously were a big time freight writer, but you told me you really started on walls.
Yeah, definitely. That was like pre-freight,
Right. But you weren't, again, some of these paintings, some of these works, you weren't always in Pittsburgh per se. I think it's important to note that you traveled quite a bit.
Yes. Yeah, the first place I lived other than Pittsburgh was Philadelphia, but that was very brief, and I painted there when I was there. Toronto really would be the place that I went that got into me. I mean, working with Quest and painting with Insight and Case, TDV Crew, Quota, traveling up to Montreal, Chrome. I mean, there's so many to mention there. All those guys were just doing amazing stuff at the time. And they really influenced me too. And that was great. Later on, I would move to Florida, to Miami, but I wasn't really actively painting graffiti. I was more making art by then. The same with the Bay Area. I was in the Bay Area for a long time in Oakland.
So what type of art were you into outside of the graffiti?
I started out painting these really kind of, expressionistic, I guess, or even like surrealist paintings. But, it was always really separate, my graffiti. I kept them very in their own lane. And I didn't really mix them together until 1997. And I had an idea for a project, and that's when finally like the two just kind of merged. And actually that's the image there. It was the first sculpture that I had done, made out of steel. It was supposed to be a one-off. And then here I am all these years later. I kind of just became a sculptor at that moment.
So in terms of working with the material, what was the relationship that you found working with a material and letter form? What was that, I guess, that sweet spot for you? Why metal?
It was, well, Steel City. I mean, we, unlike, say you're from the Bronx, right? So you kind of like grew up in the rubble of, like globalization. Well, here in the Rust Belt, we were touched differently. We were in the rubble and the remains of the industries that fed the whole rest of the country. So like my playgrounds as a kid were burnt out buildings and broken down warehouses and steel mills that we used to sneak around in and paint. And that became the place where we painted. And I felt like somehow I caught the ghost of that shit. I mean, it got into me. And like when the first time I picked up a welder, I thought it was going to make me blind. I was actually scared of it. But the minute I did it, something just clicked. And it made sense that a writer from Pittsburgh would work in steel or metal or something from this place that really represents its history.
Right. And what I really like is that you, since you were a freight writer, you also did this piece, the
Yeah,
evolving
yeah.
piece, which it looks like it's torn off the side of a freight train.
Yeah, we scaled. I went in and measured a Conrail boxcar, and I scaled it down 2/3 and drafted it, and then actually like found some broken up metal panels, and replicated what a boxcar would look like if you torch cut it and stole it out of the yard. Uh, we even stole that shifter that's sitting there out of the yard. That was a mission. That thing weighed like 200 pounds, man. We were hurting after that. But like the word evolve being there was what I saw the art form both doing and what I felt like I personally needed to do and what the art form needed to do. I thought that we needed to go beyond the literal thing that had now been happening for decades and start to push that into these different areas. Yeah, that would be the piece that I did right around the same time.
And so this what I like about this prison sculpture, now you're making sculpture and fabricating sculpture, to be specific, volumetrically.
Yes.
Not just that it's your name and you're doing this kind of, high abstraction with metal, but you've incorporated televisions and video on this piece. So you're really
Yes.
reaching with this one.
Yeah, yeah. I hooked up with these guys from Japan that I was working with, like around the electronic music scene, and I was inspired by their live video mixing. Actually, Get Funky Monkeys on there. He was one of the guys that was down with that whole scene. He was a lighting
Nice.
guy back then, and well, I wanted to sort of collaborate with them, so I went out and shot all this imagery of like city streets and train yards and like machines and all the things that were part of my environment when I was writing, and that became this psychedelic imagery that was in those television sets.
Nice. One of the things that I do like, again, that you are uh, evolving and of course using your name. And in the next slide, which I really like, is a public works commission that you got, that I wanted to share with everyone, where it's a bike rack. And really you were very sly about this, about including your name in this particular bike rack.
Yeah, that was a get over.
Fill us in on that. I love the story behind this piece.
Well, I mean, it was kind of like, if I wish Steve Powers was on here because it was kind of like a score I had to settle. He was kind enough to come here and be in a show that I curated at a gallery, co-curated, in 2000. Well, I don't know when that was. I don't want to start dating things, but he had been edited by kind of the arts organization, and I had always kind of held a little bit of a grudge about that because he was, you know, kind of, really frustrated about that as I was. So there was a commission for a bike rack, and I saw it ultimately as my way to kind of get some recompense and also, get a good laugh out of it and also sort of bomb the system. Um, hiding the word in it, which they were unaware of. I effectively tagged their cultural district, and you know they are not very graffiti friendly, so they saw it more like a 50s Eastern European sort of influenced piece in the forums. And I of course was like, yeah, sure, yeah, that's exactly what it is. and,
I love it.
and it's there, and it's on permanent display like in the middle of the city now, so like I effectively have a big tag or burner up made out of steel. And I don't know if they're aware of it, but I think it's a good graffiti story. I don't know if anyone's done that before, but I encourage you to do it.
So I want to move on to one of my favorite works that you've made, the S-curve piece. This is a mild steel sculpture. It's a large-scale sculpture. It's a volumetric sculpture, and it's a deconstruction of the S, something that you've often come back to in your work, deconstructing the letter S. This particular piece is fantastic. This is a
Thank you.
classic
Thank you.
graffiti sculpture, well advanced. What year was this?
It was completed in 2012.
So tell me about this evolution of your work, of going from flat to something like this that was, uh, you know, well advanced to anything that was being done at that time.
Well, we have to go back to phase two in his piece at the Javits Center, which you and I have discussed on many occasions. When I saw that in IGT many, many years ago, that just was like, oh shit, you can do that. So, phase two has inspired so many people over the years. So, RIP, I want to give, mad props where it's
Absolutely.
deserved, to the legends of this art form as we carry forward their vision. Um, so I kind of like was thinking about that a little bit when I started putting this together. The reason I choose the S is it's just this really amazing form in the way it moves. Um, and I see it transcending letter. Also, someone had mentioned to me years ago that when asked subconsciously, a lot of people like that. Quest money. A lot of people really like that form and are drawn to it. So I wanted to take a letter and a form that people would be very drawn to and then continue abstracting it. I use that form a lot in my work.
We can sort of see it here in one of your studio studies. I don't know. There we go. I think that's a better look at it. This is when I visited you in Pittsburgh. And one of the things that is really interesting in our dialogue about art and graffiti sculpture is that you are always advocating for process and around process, both old and new processes of making sculpture and art. And you invited me over, and the discussions, one, you exposed me to certain processes and the foundry, the Cary foundry, furnace rather, and you had already been casting and in this whole other process that I thought was a way more legitimate process for a sculptor than just the normal process I was accustomed to.
Well, we discussed this, Eduardo Chaita and, all of these artists, the Italian futurists, in art history, sculpture has been cast. I mean, it's been carved out of stone. It's been made in these ways that make it very permanent. I thought your work would translate beautifully and wanted to encourage you and have tried to encourage other graffiti artists to utilize some of these avenues that I've created and explored. And I think their work would translate beautifully to it. Again, to me, sculpture is a team sport, as we can see in the video. Not one person's going to do that. And I actually really enjoy the same as, like, say, going into a train yard with a bunch of my friends to paint, and the experiences we had. I want to have those same experiences in the sculpture studio. I don't want it to be a solitary action. And so I continually try to also encourage people who did not go to like art school, who did not have access to this kind of, medium, to then try something new and see if it will help their work develop.
And it's not for the faint of heart. It's hard labor. It really
Oh
is.
man, man, woof.
But the results. But Michael, you and I know, and this is the one thing I appreciate about you, is the hard work ethic. You have such a hardcore blue collar work ethic, and it's required. It truly is required to do such fine art, and especially these castings. But what's interesting, and people should know, because we're talking about process. You may look at these works and think, oh, he just poured them and cast them. No, let's talk about these two pieces and their processes, individual processes.
Okay, so the one on the left, actually the first 3D printed form that I used as a positive to make a bronze sculpture is the one on the left. This is a different version, it's bigger. So this is when I started to bring together my tactile process and my digital process into sort of the soup, we'll say. The one on the right is actually hand carved from, in a more traditional sense, and molded, and then finished by hand. So what I'm challenging the viewer with these is by placing them together, say in a gallery setting, I'm challenging them to first figure out what the material is, also what the process is, and also from my perspective, everything's just a tool in my arsenal. So whether it's a computer or a hammer and chisel or a state-of-the-art robotic arm or a big group of people, I mean, to me, it's all the same, or a spray can. It's all the same. They're tools. How do we extract, like, say in my case, my aesthetic and continue to evolve it by using all of these different, you know, opportunities is what they are.
Right. Like this photo, we see you doing a ceramic shell casting. Or this, I mean, what's the proper term for you? You had mentioned
It's
investment
we it
casting.
Yeah, it's an investment process and it's called ceramic shell. And right there, I'm dipping a what's called a positive, which inevitably will become the metal form that has wax welded to it. And I have to mention that like this is where my whole future primitive thing comes in. I heard somebody else refer to this in this series, and you know, I I I mean, people have been doing this since the Bronze Age, casting bronze. I mean, I jumped back, before postmodernism and looked back more at the history of art and how I could assign graffiti to it, something that's disposable, ephemeral, and start to make it in the most, kind of permanent and classical materials available. And this was the way to do that.
The next slide is great because you show that again, this is the modern process. You do a digital design, 3D printed, and then cast it and then weld it.
Yeah, that one. That's a more recent project. It was a commission for an art collector, and you know, we, it was a pretty intense project. I mean, I 3D printed all the parts after we had worked on it in the computer and sliced it up into a bunch of different parts, and that was the first time I had done that something that extreme in house. That's actually one of the components. It took probably a month and a half just to 3D print the parts, and the machines were pretty much almost continuously going. That you're seeing how the process works of building something layer by layer, line by line, in order to get a form. So, like a piece like the one to the right could take somewhere around 4 days to actually print on the much like I have a pretty medium scale print volume. Um, I was lucky to get a grant and some other support to get these printers into my studio.
One of the things I like about you both as an artist and as a friend, you advocate for the use of technology to make the process easier for yourself so you could realize it differently and so that you could imagine your work in both in material process that's new and different, but also to have you thinking differently about the outcome of this work.
Well, yeah, I mean, the piece here, this was the first one done. Actually, he logged in here, a longtime co-collaborator, Elliot Shields, a brilliant 3D modeler, helped me do this before I had any ability whatsoever with the computer. He was very instrumental, and that relationship was very instrumental. And as you see, I keep going back to like our collaboration, my collaborations with Elliot. I mean, these are collaborations like a musician would have with a producer, with other musicians to create an album or an end product. That's what I keep going back to sculpture being a team sport. It requires different minds, different skill sets, different visions. Those relationships can become very difficult and tenuous because especially when you're trying to create something at this time in 2012 that was really on the cutting edge of, what you could do as a sculptor. It wasn't common to be using these
So
tools
tell
at that
me,
time.
as you're venturing down this uncharted territory, and you start showing these works to your contemporaries, whether they're graffiti writers or just artists, studio artists, what kind of responses are you getting about, working with this new technology?
Mainly good. I had some backlash from a few people, but I even thought their insights were really good. Some people think that once you breach that it's kind of like a no-no. But Charlie Christian, when he plugged in an electric guitar and recorded an album, I mean, all the traditional blues guys were like, that's not the blues anymore. And then, a decade and a half later, so we had like Chuck Berry and Jimi Hendrix. So I guess what I'm saying is like, this opens up Pandora's box of possibility. You don't have to be, someone who studied how to use the tools for 10 years and now you can be a sculptor. You can be a kid who's got a library card that's in the projects that doesn't have money, like somebody who can afford to go to a technical college that has this tooling. And you can give your insight and your input into the world of sculpture, which will bring different stuff out. That's why I keep encouraging graffiti artists to jump on this, because most of us, we steal paint, and that's how we became artists, because we didn't have money or we didn't have those opportunities. So that's part of this mission for me. Is me I'm trailblazing it so that I can share the process. Like anybody could hit me up and I'd be really happy to tell you how to do this, because we didn't know how to do it in the beginning.
Right.
We had to fuck a lot of shit up, man, and not come out. It was expensive, and it could be very demoralizing at times, man.
Yeah, and going back to process, because it's not just 3D printed machines that you use. In this particular piece, you use a CNC machine, and
Yeah.
this is the Interstellar series. Let's talk about the series, because this is a really fascinating one, because it really kind of lends itself to the industrial nature of Pittsburgh, your interest in contemporary architecture and modern design. But more importantly, again, I always bring it back to process. You're a process guy. Tell us about how you arrived at this series.
Actually, it's the strangest thing. I mean, my partner would attest to this. She came to the studio, and I was like, "Look, I just did this thing, and it broke this whole new ground." And um, I just stumbled on it. I needed some other pieces for a solo show I was doing in Oregon in 2012, and I really loved this pink plexiglass. I had done one piece earlier in my friend Sean Barton's studio in Seattle, which he's on here. What's up, man? Got to give a shout out. Um, and I really liked this material. We had found it at an old sign shop that was going out of business that was willing to give us this material. And it creates these like panes of color that project on the piece as the light changes around it. And the form underneath it, that's more three-dimensional and architectural, is more akin to processes I learned making foundry patterns. But if you look at them, this one, for example, is called topography, because I look at it almost like what architecture would read like if you were flying over it in a helicopter or something like that, or a plane. And um, you know, the one on the right was actually handmade, and the one and it told me, hey, why don't you learn this computer program and learn how to make these also, so you can scale them and play with another different process in the computer. So on the left there, you can see it being CNC milled by Cerebral Concepts, he's amazing, the guy who made that.
You also made a beautiful marble sculpture and employing CNC machine, but it's a bigger story than just that, right?
Yeah,
You were in
yeah.
Italy doing a residency. This is a phenomenal piece. Tell our viewers of this particular project.
Well, this is what started our conversation. You remember Christy Zappon was trying to hook us up for many years, and then finally I got a message from you. I'm like, cool. because I'd wanted to talk to you for a long time as someone I looked at as my contemporary in this, making sculpture out of the graffiti thing, and someone who was for real with it. This was carved on a 7-axis robot. I was very lucky to be invited to the Digital Stone residency by Robert Michael Smith, who's a pioneer in digital sculpting and an amazing sculptor. He's been a great friend and mentor to me. And this piece, once again, dissecting the S, was modeled and then sent over and carved out of a solid block of marble, which was harvested from the Italian Alps. And when I got there, it's very intimidating. I'm like, I'm going to screw this thing up. I had never worked with stone before, and I just, I was intimidated by it at first. It took a day or so, and then I really dug into it, and it took me about 30 days to carve all the facets you see because it was very much roughed out. And I was lucky enough to have, Italian artisans that some of them were 4th and 5th generation stone carvers. And, the respect that I got from them as a fellow sculptor in Italy, where sculpture is like, that's what's up. I felt really honored and humbled by that, and also had learned so much through their tutelage and this opportunity.
Yeah, and this, just so people know, that this is the same quarry that Michelangelo would get his marble.
No, not the same quarry, but the same region where a lot of the marble had been harvested for significant works, including Michelangelo, the monuments of Rome, and I see Carolyn Frischling on here. She also attended the residency. So yeah, I mean, I was walking down the road of history. Then, of course, the object was shown at first in Pietrasanta, which is where Brancusi and Osamu Noguchi worked together. And I mean, on and on and on. And so I felt really honored as a graffiti artist to have this very unique opportunity where I'd always been boxed out of academia and opportunities like this. A lot of times the aesthetic was too aggressive, or something was amiss, or graffiti was dismissed as this, lowbrow sort of thing. But here I am working in the most classical material in the most significant sculptural region in the world, probably close to, if not the most important one. And, being able to have a dialogue with people that were not, don't know anything about graffiti. And they were really excited about it, man, because it was something new, as a fresh look at what, is their primary practice,
I want to jump back to the Interstellar series. And when I was talking to you earlier about them, particularly the wall relief, to me, it really looks so much like your style writing. Like it's just lifted off the last pieces you were painting, the bits and pieces and the odd shapes. But
absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us about how you started bringing this series into the round as opposed to a relief series.
The first two were relief. Well, no, actually, the first one was relief. Then there's a couple other ones kind of, but the one to the right was the one that really broke it wide open. I just wanted to carve wood. I don't know why. I just had a bunch laying around, and I started making that, though. That thing looks nothing like it's made out of wood and terracotta. And that's too became a pursuit. How can I make things out of materials that someone won't be able to perceive what it actually is? They'll think it's something else. Sometimes I get plastic. Other times I get all of these different, materials that people think they are. Like that blue sphere is actually a terracotta lawn ball. And, I wanted to do that. I wanted to I really I think it's mischief, but I like playing with people's perception of what things are. I also really enjoy futurist architecture, futurist sculpture, Sid Mead, anything Blade Runner, Cloud City, Star Wars, and this was a way for graffiti and architecture and modernism and futurism and constructionism to find a home, and it to grow beyond being just, not just, because that's not right. Let me back up. To be, more of a potential language than just sticking to a letter. There's bits and pieces of letters everywhere in this, in the positive and negative space. But at this point, I've completely transcended the letter, even though it is graffiti-ish. I don't know how to put it. It's
Well,
like I'm.
yeah. You
No, go
mentioned
ahead, please.
you mentioned not constructivism, but constructed works, right?
Yeah.
Not that it's kind of a deconstruction and reconstruction of the graffiti letter form.
Yes. Yes. And it's meant to move like it, and it's meant to feel like it, but it's also then meant to go somewhere else and evolve. It's meant to, like this one, I was actually thinking about Anthony Caro and the way
Oh,
his work moves
he's
through space,
brilliant.
and how revolutionary that was. But then also too, I wanted to have a playfulness and a graffiti, like these are like arm bars busting off of a letter form, and then when the light reflects through it, you get all these like kind of prisms of color and these panes that look like sort of when light comes through a stained glass window. And the reason I chose an off-white is I really like the way that the light going through the pink plexiglass creates these different colors. It changes the perception of the piece as the day moves. I don't know. These are hard to talk about. I mean, I think I'm still trying to figure it out.
No, I love the way you're describing them because it's so brilliant because it's true because generally people would look at a sculpture like this and maybe find it static when in fact it has a life of its own in space, and that, like you said, as light moves across these surfaces, it starts to reveal more of it, right? It starts to change it, and it's something that whether you're indoors and outdoors, it's quite beautiful because they're so complex, because of these clear planes. That makes a huge difference in the experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the idea, is that I wanted them to continually change so that someone was able to see it do that through the course of the day. Um, I really have always liked thinking about the way light affects things. That's why a lot of my graffiti is so colorful. And then people are like, why don't you paint more color in your forms? It would almost be like overkill, where the form themselves is starting to take on that same kind of dance or move or whatever it might be. And we haven't touched on it, that music is my primary thing that I listen to kind of catalyze these things. The same way a dancer would, I pick very specific music I listen to, and it renders sort of specific compositions.
There's another
So
one.
yeah, well, that's the one. That's the opposite view of it. And this one too brought together, when we were talking about bringing a bunch of processes together. All those round things are cast iron, and the rest of it, the white parts, are made out of steel, fabricated and very painstakingly ground and polished to look as though they have always been one thing. It's very laborious, and I was very proud of myself to have really tricked a sculpture professor who thought this was actually digitally rendered when he walked up to it, because I had put so much detail into it. To be able to correct him about that, a trained eye validated my interest in trying to play with people's perception of what these things were made out of, or how they were made, or why they were made, or whatever.
Going back to what you were saying before about minimizing color use and being overly decorative, I appreciate that because I think form, well-made and designed or fabricated forms in themselves need not too much light. And Brancusi was brilliant at that with his sculptures. That you know light was an element. The air was an element, and you could see that
Absolutely.
in the works that you're doing in your open spaces, and of course how the open light affects these spaces. And as we think about well, you and I discuss your work, one of the things I think about in terms of open air and open light, this one project you did was a very special project in open space and open light, and it was at Burning Man,
Yeah.
the Cosmic Carousel. This is quite an achievement, and I want you to share with us this amazing story about this giant sculpture.
Wow. Okay. So this one, this is a real one-off, though it is my aesthetic. It's very Sid Mead again, or like, futurist or something like that. Well, I was in my studio preparing for a metal pour, carving foam forms, and it turns out that I had actually, ES412, he was there this night. He'll remember this story. A half circle or a hemisphere was glued on that was actually much heavier than the rest of the form. And, we're doing what you do. It's late at night. We're smoking joints, drinking beers, talking shit. And I throw the piece across the table and go, look, I'm magic. And it spun around on this hemisphere and stood up. And we were like, holy shit. And it was like one of those moments in time. So out come the fake trees and the G.I. Joe figures or whatever we could get our hands on. And we'd start playing with it. And I tell Elliot here, who's on here, I'm like, I'll be at your house in 2 days with the flat drawings, and he's a 3D modeler and animator. I was like, can you animate this thing? I'm going to build this thing big as hell and take it to Burning Man. He's like, you're completely out of your mind. It's like 5 months away. There's no fucking way you can do this. And I will say he was right, and I shouldn't have, because it was like the craziest thing that anyone that I just timeline, everything. It was ballistic.
How did you manage to fund this?
Well, there was a Kickstarter, and then some contributions from individuals, and then we tapped the Herb Green Foundation for the Arts, and we did whatever we had to do. The story behind this is so serendipitous. Literally, like parts we would need, like for example, the mirror polished aluminum, we couldn't afford it. And then this metal liquidator guy I know calls me 3 days before we were going to purchase the other aluminum and says, you're never going to believe this, but a Boeing 747 just got fucking liquidated. And FAA protocol is that they cannot, do this. So nobody wants this metal. Like, I'll sell it to you for X dollars a pound. And I was like, I'll pay cash. What's up with X dollars a pound? And we drove down there and picked up as much of it as we could buy. And just, we're like water jet cutting at a tech shop. We pissed them off and got kicked out because we like took over tech shop. This shit was just like, it was crazy from beginning to end, and probably still is. There's a lot of people like Lisa Sunday's on here. I see she's a real believer in this project. She's helped it get other bookings, and it still stands behind trying to help its story continue. But I think,
Michael, explain to folks that who may not understand metal and that in particular this type of metal in this kind of heat and environment is not cooking those people that are sitting on top of it.
Well, the metallurgy, aluminum is a heat sink. So what's cool, you put it out in the desert and the heat runs through it and is dissipated. If you would have made that out of steel, no one could have even got on it. Well, also too, it weighed like, 25,000 pounds. So it actually doesn't get that hot. And, a lot of people when, yeah, I don't know. So what's really interesting about this that's really outside of what I do normally is this is actually a team building exercise. So here's this thing that's mesmerizing you that's also very dangerous, because beautiful things are often dangerous in this world. And all of a sudden you get people creating this mini culture on it that is akin to the ideas that Burning Man proliferates. So alphas go to alpha roles, people start becoming collaborative and cooperative to help one another up onto the piece. Inside of it, there's actually a round circle, so no one's sitting at the head of the table, so to speak. It evens out everyone and creates a situation too where no one can be on their phone or distracted. They're just simply on this big ride, and they're all working and talking and functioning together. And that, that was a really, that's where this really came together. The other thing is it's an implied use that no one was told about. And as soon as we unveiled it, everyone did exactly what we expected to do. Architects try that all the time, and it's disastrous. So for a bunch of like stoner knuckleheads and like unemployable crazy fabricator fucks and other assorted weirdos to do this, and graffiti writers and animators and whatever else, that's a good story. It worked. This is the most successful piece of art I think that I've ever made. And everyone who was involved in the project was just as important as me. It couldn't have happened without the soup of people. I mean, it's an unbelievable story. I don't have time to tell the whole thing.
Where is it? Where is it today?
It's in storage in Modesto, California, in a tractor trailer. Some really nice people let me keep it on their farm.
Someday?
Yeah. I mean, we want to do it soon. I mean, there's some talks about it, doing some stuff in Southern California. It was at the World's Fair Nano in San Francisco. It was at Maker Faire in San Mateo a few years back, and actually was the focal object of that, which much love to the Flux Foundation and other folks for hooking that up. And, Make Magazine and, the Maker Faire organization. That was great.
Michael, one of the things that really drew me to you was your drive creatively, but also your desire for innovation. You and I both live in that space, in the search for innovation, marrying technology, philosophy, aesthetic, and material. And as we often say, let's make art of our time with the tools of our time. And more recently, which I've been a big fan of, and of course learning from you, is about employing virtual reality into the work. And this is the space we're in right now. We're kind of operating in this virtual space through communication.
Definitely.
And now we can collaborate virtually. I want to share with everybody his process because it's quite fantastic. And here we go. I want to share your virtual reality process.
I could get you those threads if you really want to get them, man. I mean, they're hard to come by, but.
So I want people to notice that while he's utilizing a virtual reality software, that he has 3D printers next to him as well.
Yeah, not anymore, because they'll make you sick. Got to get them in a different room.
Explain to me this process now for making something tangible from something intangible. Just drawing.
This brings it all together. Like, again, this was another thing. The project you saw where I was in a motion capture lab, Matt Cornelius, who at the time was at the New York Institute of Technology, and Robert Michael Smith. Robert thought I'd be perfect for this in that, I had done a lot of psychedelic experimentation early on in my painting that had become a big part of how I conceive making things. When I went into virtual reality, it was immediate. Because I already kind of understood how to navigate a strange space like that. I remember, for example, like the first time I went in, they left and went to lunch, and they came back and they're like, dude, how did you get out of there? And I'm like, no, and I had been in for 4 hours, and they're like, nobody's been in that long yet. And I'm like, I feel completely comfortable. So the original experiments, we put speakers all around the motion capture studio and played music. And I basically was almost interpreting the music in, not that I dance, but my body movements and stuff, and my muscle memory of painting with a graffiti can made the original compositions. And I continued to refine that whenever I was able to afford and get a setup myself at home, which you saw. And I've had some support from some really good people to help me get this equipment so that I could continue to experiment. So these things took on like the letter, the music, the dance. Like this one, for example, is called On the One, and that's the James Brown funk formula. So the funk music is instrumental in the development of hip hop, electronic music, so many things. And then, a lot of go to for me too is like electronic music, psychedelic rock, stuff like that, that I draw from and actually sculpt to the music when I can really, really catch a wave, so to speak. So I would have to say skateboarding, the movements of skateboarding are also alive in this work. Um, you know, and it becomes, as you can see, more fluid and weightless, like the environment, the virtual environment. But here it is now. I'm 3D printing it, and even 3D printing it and then casting it in metal. It's taking on this really crazy life. When people walk up to it, it's like it's moving, which is very difficult to do with sculpture. Um, and these are, I now have an entire body of these works done, and now I'm starting to push the aesthetic even further.
Yeah,
Mindful, though, not to take it too far because you can, and then it just looks like too much. So that's the hard part, is knowing when to finish, you know?
yeah, you're absolutely right about that. But one of the things it's yielded was just a completely unorthodox uh, uh, style, forms, movement. And again, it is unconventional. That's what I really appreciated, because it doesn't seem to me, even though you mentioned some people that you are influenced by, it seems so authentic on its own. And I know your quest is to be authentic in your experience and your work as well. And that's one of the nice things that these tools are affording you, to experiment and go places where perhaps no one has gone before.
I almost want to be like on some Captain Kirk shit, but
I was
no,
just thinking
listen.
the same thing.
No, man, I don't even like Star Trek that much, man, but it's okay. I like Spock. Spock's cool. But yeah, and I just see this as an opportunity. Look, I mean, can you imagine if you handed this tool to someone 200 years ago? They definitely would play with it. They would definitely go, I've also been trying to turn other sculptors onto this. This is a new frontier for all of us. We have the ability now too, and I do want to talk about, I don't know how much time we have, but I want to talk about the fact that like the materials and the imprint what we do is having on the environment and on ourselves and our health. Like sculpture materials are terrible for you. I mean, I've gotten sick a few times from it. Now we can create these works in a virtual space, share them on all these different mediums. We can keep ourselves out of a toxic environment until it's time to actually use those tools. We can create less litter and waste, which I started to become really aware of watching all the garbage cans and dumpsters leave. I'm just like, spray cans on the train tracks. After a while, you're just like, man, come on, like,
But is it satisfying enough for you to create something in virtual space, uh, or even AR space, comparatively to what the labor produces, the
yes,
tangible good?
yes. And I've explored labor, and my aging body is telling me, hey, dude, like maybe not this season. And that becomes a thing. Like, youth is wasted on the young, as they say. So now that I hopefully have a little more wisdom, how can I apply this? And the cool thing about this too is if a collector walks in and says, hey, I like that piece, but God, I wish it was 2 inches or 5 inches smaller. It would fit my atrium. We scale it down and go, here you go. So it also has a commercial response. It has a responsibility to a lot of things. And through pioneering this and with library programs and things like this, once again, someone who traditionally wouldn't be a sculptor, someone who's good at playing video games, I can say, hey, man, make a sculpture and it's going to look really different than what other people are doing. And that's exciting too. I don't know if I answered your question. Maybe I
No, but that
drifted,
makes
but
sense, Michael, because that builds on something very important about where young people are, and when they are you know, in engaged in the matrix, let's just say, whether it's a Sim City type of experience or, you know, something like that, where they start building and constructing environments, right? And so, you know, the future is theirs in that regard, that they're going to have these skill sets and memory of being able to build and construct in very rudimentary ways, but the tools are there for them to play, as you say, you know, this kind of democratizes everything because
Absolutely, man. Because like it's the Pro Tools from that the music industry got that made you be able to make an album that was worthy at home for like a little bit of money, and now we have it for sculpture or whatever else we want to do with it. You know, and I think that that's what's so cool about it. And the fact that you can be in Miami, I can be here in Pittsburgh, and we can jump on a sesh together and work in virtual space. I mean, look at how that can apply right now to this particular situation.
yeah.
It creates these new avenues and these new perceptions of
Right. And
what can
you could,
happen.
right. And it's about streamlining a process, automating a process, and manufacturing a process, which in the final moments, as we're closing out, this idea, this reality that we find ourselves now, where things have to be automated to engage and serve the crisis we're in. You took time to, you know, 3D print parts for masks and things like this. How are you coping with Corona? How is that affecting your work, your
Well, here,
career?
Yum Chow made these too. My partner, Julia Drazik, she designed these masks. We both felt a social obligation to pick up where our fucked up government that doesn't do shit except talk shit. Like, that's where I'm coming from. Like, that they should be making sure that everyone is healthy and safe and has what they need, and they are not. So, as someone who had the tools, as a maker and artist and all these things, it would have been, I think, disrespectful to our first responders and the people being put in the line of fire, our nurses and our doctors, to not use those tools to try to help them get the things they need. And I think a lot of people, I'm not patting myself on the back, man. It's what you do in the dark, not in the light, that makes you who you are. And, as you remember, I was even like on the fence about talking about this, but this was our response to trying to be helpful to the people who would keep everyone safe and healthy. And there were a lot of people here regionally, and there's networks all over the place, like in New Jersey and the Bay Area that I was communicating with. We were able to send some stuff out to Hawaii to a friend of mine who's a nurse. This got a lot of people talking, and this is the failure of leadership that this world needs to cure so that we can have a better reality for everyone. And that's all this is about.
Thank you,
From my
Michael.
perspective. Yes.
What a beautiful way to end this conversation. Thank you for sharing your amazing work with us and also these processes. And I hope somebody out there is inspired enough to contact you.
Well, thank you, man. You have been my number one support and friend, and thank you for this, and thank you to the Museum of Graffiti and everybody on here. I see a lot of my friends and a lot of other people I don't know. Thank you very much for checking this out. Really appreciate it.
And so with that, I want to say thank you and thank everybody who joined us today. Tomorrow, we're going to be joined by West Coast legend Create. WCA is going to be in the house. It's going to be really fantastic. So again, Michael, to you and Yum Chow, I send you my regards, my love. Thank you for sharing all your work and your wisdom with us. And again, folks, check us out at the museumofgraffiti.com. Check out our programming. Download the coloring book. By the way, you're in the number 4 coloring book, so that's pretty cool.
Color outside the lines, man.
There it is. And so check out what we're doing and how we are managing to stay afloat. We are accepting donations, but we're also accepting, people who want to buy artworks from other artists and books and things like that. And as you know, Michael, we are doing the best we can with what we've got.